Welcome, you brave souls, to NoSleep Nightmares Reddit. I'm your host, the voice in the shadows pulling you into the dark. Ever wonder what's really out there in the wild, beyond the trails, past the trees, where the silence screams louder than you ever could? Tonight, we're diving into a collection of nightmares, true tales from the woods that'll make you question every rustle, every shadow. From a gorge that whispers your name to a scream that isn't human, these stories will claw into your mind and won't let go. Stick around, because the last one is the kind of terror you'll never see coming, hiding in places you thought were safe. Before we start, hit that like, share this dread, and subscribe to NoSleep Nightmares Reddit. Help me reach 1,000 subs so I can keep dragging you deeper into the dark with more twisted tales. Ready? Let's step into the nightmare. My name's Ethan. I've been hiking and camping my whole life. Those trails in Northern California are my blood, my bones. I've slept under stars so bright they burn your eyes, and I've walked paths so silent you'd swear the earth was holding its breath. But Reservoir, that place, it's different. It's not just remote, it's wrong. And what happened there a few days after Labor Day, on a weekday when the world was too busy to care, still claws at the back of my mind. I can't shake it. I don't think I ever will. It started innocently enough. I'd been camping with friends at Reservoir, a sprawling stretch of water tucked off Highway 4 in Northern California. The kind of place you'd miss if you blinked. Hidden behind miles of winding dirt roads and jagged pines that stab at the sky. After Labor Day, it's a ghost town. No families, no weekend warriors, just us. A handful of idiots chasing solitude. We'd spent days fishing, laughing, letting the sun bake our skin, while the water lapped at the shore. It was perfect. Too perfect, maybe. By the time we packed up, I wasn't ready to leave. The others piled into the car, dust kicking up as they peeled out, but I lingered. One last hike, I told myself. Just me, my backpack, and the trails. I headed toward the dead end of the road, past the closed-off paths and a slick rock jeep trail that looked like it hadn't seen tires in years. My boots crunched on gravel as I descended toward a small pen lake, a glassy mirror reflecting the cliffs above. It was peaceful, quiet, too quiet. I should have turned back then. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. And the birds, there weren't any. Not a chirp, not a flutter. Just silence so thick it buzzed in my ears. But I kept going. Stubborn as always, until I hit the trail back up. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the middle of the path, maybe 60 yards ahead. An older guy, white hair gleaming like a beacon against the muted browns and greens of the forest. Solidly built, like he'd spent his life hauling something heavier than regrets. I raised a hand, gave a quick, "Hey," expecting a nod or a wave. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. Waiting for my group, they're past the boulders up the hill. I glanced up. Sure enough, a jeep was parked about 50 feet higher, dust still settling around it. A younger guy, mid-30s maybe, leaned against it, watching me. Something about his posture set my nerves on edge, but I brushed it off. People are weird out here sometimes. I kept walking, closing the gap, the old man's eyes locked on my backpack, zeroing in on the stitched name. My German last name, Schroeder. His lips split into a grin, too wide, too sharp. "Hey, Junior," he called, not breaking eye contact. "He's with us. Show him." Junior didn't say a word. He just lifted his shirt, slow and deliberate, revealing two massive swastika tattoos sprawled across his stomach, black ink stark against pale skin. My stomach dropped. I forced a nod, a tight smile, anything to keep this from turning ugly. The old man started rambling about guns, how they'd been shooting all morning at some off-road camp nearby. Junior slid into the Jeep, easing it down the trail as the old man stepped closer, directing him around boulders like it was a damn Sunday drive. That's when I saw them. 2 more Jeeps cresting the hill, low and heavy, loaded with men. They didn't wave, didn't nod, just stared, eyes boring into me as I passed. I muttered some excuse, "Gotta get back, nice meeting you," and turned up the hill, walking fast, heart hammering. I didn't run, not yet, but I felt it. Their gazes, like fingers digging into my spine. When I hit my car, I floored it out of there, dust choking the rear view. I never saw them again. But that wasn't the end. That was just the beginning. I thought I'd escaped. I thought it was over. Just a creepy run-in with some backwoods creeps who'd had too much beer and bravado. But UA Reservoir doesn't let go that easy. See, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The silence. The way that old man's grin stretched like it wasn't his face. The way Junior's eyes didn't blink, not once. And those other guys, they didn't feel human. Not entirely. I had to know what I'd walked into. So like an idiot, I went back. 2 days later, I was back at the reservoir, alone this time. The sun was dipping low, painting the cliffs in shades of blood and shadow. I parked where the road died, grabbed my flashlight, and started down that same Jeep trail. The air was colder now, sharper, biting at my lungs. No birds, no wind. Just my boots on the dirt and the thud of my pulse. The pen lake was still there, a black mirror under the fading light. I scanned the shore, half expecting to see that old man or his tattooed lackey lurking. Nothing, just stillness. I turned back up the trail, retracing my steps, when I heard it. A low, guttural hum. Not mechanical, not animal, something else. It rolled up from the ground, vibrating through my boots, making my teeth ache. I froze, flashlight sweeping the trees. The beam caught something, movement, quick and jerky, darting behind a pine. Too tall for a deer, too fast for a bear. My breath hitched. "Who's there?" I called, voice cracking. No answer, just that hum, growing louder, sinking into my bones. Then the smell hit me. Rot, wet, rancid decay, like something dead had been dragged through the mud and left to fester. I gagged, swinging the light around, and that's when I saw the tracks. Not boots, not paws. Long, claw-like gouges in the dirt, stretching up the trail toward the boulders where the Jeep had been. They weren't there 2 days ago. I'd have noticed. My gut screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The hum spiked, sharp and piercing, and the trees, God, the trees, they started to bend. Not with wind. There was no wind. They bent inward toward me, branches creaking like breaking bones. I stumbled back, flashlight slipping in my sweaty grip, and that's when the shadows moved. Figures, dozens of them, slid out from the trees. Tall, thin, wrong. Their outlines flickered, like they couldn't decide if they were solid or smoke. Eyes glinted in the dark, too many, too bright, hollow and unblinking. They didn't speak, didn't scream, just watched, heads tilting in unison, like they were sizing me up. I ran, tripped over roots, scraped my hands bloody on rocks, didn't care. The hum chased me, a wave of sound that pressed against my skull, threatening to crack it open. I don't know how I made it back to my car. Adrenaline, dumb luck, something. But when I slammed the door and peeled out, the rear view showed nothing. No figures, no bent trees, just darkness. That night, I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those hollow eyes, felt that hum rattling my ribs. I told myself it was a trick of the light, exhaustion, maybe even guilt from brushing off those creeps 2 days earlier. But the scratches on my hands, the mud caked on my boots, they were real, too real. And the smell, it clung to me, seeping into my clothes, my skin. I had to know what was out there, so I went back a third time, armed with more than just a flashlight. I packed my car with gear, cameras, audio recorders, a knife, anything I thought might help. It was mid-afternoon when I arrived. The sky a dull grey, heavy with clouds that seemed to press the air down. The jeep trail felt narrower this time, the pines closing in, their needles brushing my arms like fingers. I set up a trail cam near the Penn Lake, pointing it at the claw marks, and strapped a GoPro to my chest. If something was out here, I'd catch it. The hum started before I even reached the boulders. Faint at first, then louder, a vibration that buzzed in my teeth. I found the Jeep again, still parked where it had been, but it looked older. Rust ate through the hood. Vines snaked through the windows, like it had been abandoned for decades, not days. I circled it, heart pounding, and saw something glinting inside, a stack of Polaroids. My hands shook as I grabbed them. They were of me from that first hike, me walking the trail, me by the lake, me staring at the camera with eyes I didn't remember having. Hollow, unblinking, wrong. The photos slipped from my fingers, scattering in the dirt. The hum spiked, and I spun, knife out. The hollows were there, closer now, their forms flickering between human and skeletal, eyeless sockets glowing. One reached for me, its claw brushing my arm, and I felt it, cold, wet, like stepping into a grave. A black mark bloomed where it touched, searing into my skin. I swung the knife, hit nothing but air, and ran, the GoPro bouncing against my chest. They didn't chase, not fast anyway, just glided, their whispers filling my head. Ethan, come back, stay. I made it to my car, barely, the mark burning, the hum a scream in my skull. I didn't look back. I thought getting out of UA Reservoir that third time would be the end of it. I'd survived 3 times now, and that should have been enough to slap some sense into me. But sense doesn't stick when you can still feel those hollow eyes boring into your soul, when the hum lingers in your chest like a second heartbeat. I couldn't let it go. I had to know what I'd seen, what I'd felt. So I started digging, and what I found, it didn't just keep me up at night. It started unraveling me. Back home, I locked myself in my apartment, blinds drawn, laptop glowing like a lifeline. The smell of rot still clung to me. I'd scrubbed my skin raw, burned my clothes, but it was in my nose, my lungs, a permanent guest. My hands shook as I typed UA Reservoir history into every search bar I could think of. At first, it was nothing. Fishing reports, water levels, a bland Wikipedia page. Then I hit the dark corners of the internet, the places where people don't care if you think they're crazy. That's where I found Trail Ghost and his 2003 blog post. His words mirrored mine too closely. Tall, thin figures with ember eyes, a hum that sank into his bones, claw marks where no claw should have been. He'd camped near the Penn Lake, same as me, and woke to his tent slashed open, his gear scattered like something had torn through it in a rage. I heard them whispering my name, he wrote. Not out loud, in my head. I haven't slept right since. The comments were a mess. Half calling him a liar, half begging for more. One stuck out, Pine Watcher, claiming his uncle found bones near the lake in the 70s. Human and animal fused together. Ribs curled into spirals no skeleton should make. The reservoir's alive, he said. It takes what it wants. I laughed, nervous, brittle. But the claw marks I'd seen weren't funny. Neither was the hum, or the way my flashlight caught those flickering shapes. I kept digging, chasing threads. Old newspaper scans from the 50s, when they built the dam, mentioned workers vanishing. 6 in 1 month, no bodies, no trace. The official story was accidents, drownings, but a grainy photo showed a foreman staring at the camera, eyes wide, mouth slack, like he'd seen something he couldn't unsee. A caption read, "Project delayed by unexplained incidents." Then I found Tom Haskins. Took me 3 days to track him down. Retired ranger, living in Stockton. Hands trembling around a coffee mug in a diner that smelled like grease and regret. He didn't want to talk, not until I said, "Hollow eyes." His face drained of color, voice dropping to a rasp. "The hollows," he said. "That's what they are. Been there since the water came. Workers saw 'em first, shadows that didn't move right, voices in the wind. My partner, Jim, he went out there in 92, near that Jeep trail. Said he'd check a noise, never came back. Found his boots a week later, upright in the mud, laces tied, like he'd walked out of them and kept going." I pressed him. "What are they?" He shook his head, eyes darting to the window. "Not people, not animals, something older. They don't just kill you, they take you. Feed on the fear, the loneliness. You felt it, didn't you? That pull." I nodded, throat tight. He leaned closer, coffee sloshing. "Stay away, kid. They've got your scent now. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't." The mark on my arm, where that thing had touched me, itched, then burned. I peeled back my sleeve and froze. It wasn't just a bruise anymore. Black veins snaked under my skin, thin at first, like cracks in ice spreading from the point of contact. My mirror showed a stranger, eyes sunken, skin grey, like I was rotting from the inside. I tried to call it stress, exhaustion, but then the nightmares started. They weren't dreams, they were there. I'd wake up choking, the room dark, but I'd hear it, that hum, low and insistent, vibrating the walls. Shadows stretched across my ceiling, too long, too thin, with hollow eyes staring down. I'd blink, and they'd be gone, but the mark grew. By day 3, it reached my elbow, the skin splitting, oozing something black that smelled like the reservoir, wet decay, ancient and alive. I went back to my recordings from that 3rd trip, desperate for proof I wasn't losing it. The audio was static at first, then voices, mine pleading, "Please, let me go," over and over. I hadn't said that. I'd been silent, running, not begging. The video was worse. Grainy footage of the trees bending, the claw marks, then a frame, half a second, of my face, staring into the lens, eyes hollow, mouth stretched in that too wide grin. I dropped the camera, heart slamming against my ribs. It wasn't me. It couldn't be me. I found an old journal next, buried in a library archive. A settler's account from 1847, before the Reservoir, when the land was just cliffs and pines. He wrote of shadow folk who hunted his wagon train, picking them off one by one. "They wear our faces," he scribbled, ink smeared with what looked like tears. "They call our names in the dark, and when you answer, you're theirs." The last page was a sketch, tall, eyeless figures, claw hands outstretched, standing over bones twisted into impossible shapes. A local historian, some grey-haired woman with too many rings, tied it to a native legend. "The land was sacred," she said, voice low. a burial ground for something older than us. When they flooded it, they woke it up. It's been feeding ever since. She looked at my arm, at the mark, and her eyes widened. You've been claimed. Claimed. The word sank into me, heavy as the hum. I didn't want to believe it, but the mirror didn't lie. The mark didn't lie. The hollows had me, and they weren't letting go. I should have listened to Tom, to the historian, to my own damn gut. But by the time I realized how deep I was, running wasn't an option. The mark was up to my shoulder now, black veins pulsing under my skin, splitting it open like dry earth. I couldn't feel my arm anymore, just cold, like it wasn't mine. The hum was constant, a drone in my skull, and the hollows. They weren't just in my dreams. I'd catch them in reflections, in the corner of my eye, waiting. I had one shot left. Go back to UA Reservoir, find where they came from, and end it. Whatever it was. I drove out at dusk, the sky bruising purple, my trunk loaded with everything I could think of. Flashlights, salt, a crowbar, a recorder, a pistol I barely knew how to use. The road to the reservoir felt longer this time, the pines looming like sentinels, their branches clawing at the car. When I hit the dead-end trail, I stepped out, and the air hit me, thick, wet, reeking of rot so strong I gagged. The reservoir wasn't right. The water was black, still as glass, no ripples, no life. The trees weren't trees anymore. They twisted into spirals, bark peeling like flesh, bending toward the lake as if drawn to it. I started down the jeep trail, flashlight shaking in my good hand. The hum was everywhere now, a wall of sound that pressed against my eardrums, threatening to burst them. My boots sank into the dirt, each step heavier, like the ground was pulling me down. The jeep was still there, rusted, skeletal, vines snaking through the frame. I circled it, heart pounding, and saw the claw marks again, deeper now, gouged into the metal like it was butter. Something glinted inside. A Polaroid, faded but clear. Me, from that first hike. Staring at the camera with hollow eyes I didn't remember having. I stumbled back, breath ragged, and that's when the hollows came. They didn't creep this time. They surged, spilling from the trees, the water, the shadows. Dozens, hundreds, their forms flickering. Human 1 second, skeletal the next. Eyeless sockets glowing with a sickly light. They didn't run, didn't lunge, just glided, heads tilting, mouths stretching into those two wide grins. The hum turned to whispers. My name over and over, Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. A chorus of voices that weren't theirs, weren't mine, weren't anything. I ran, flashlight swinging, beam catching their shapes, limbs too long, fingers like claws, faces that flickered into people I knew. My mom, my brother, Tom Haskins, all eyeless, all grinning. The trail blurred, roots snagging my feet, but I didn't stop until I hit the Pen Lake. The water was a void, blacker than night, and at its edge, a cave half hidden by vines, its mouth gaping like a wound in the earth. The whispers pushed me toward it, the mark burning, pulling. I didn't want to go in, but my legs moved anyway, like they weren't mine anymore. Inside, the air was ice, the hum deafening. My flashlight flickered, barely cutting through the dark. The walls were carved, eyeless faces, claw hands, spiraled bones etched in stone. Older than the reservoir, older than anything. The floor was littered with skeletons, human, animal, twisted together, ribs curled into cages, skulls split open like they'd screamed until they broke. At the center, a pit, bottomless, pulsing with that hum. And the hollows, they were there, lining the walls, watching. I tried to turn back, but the mark erupted. black veins bursting through my skin, wrapping my chest, my throat. I fell, crowbar clattering, and they closed in. Their hands, cold, wet, wrong, grabbed me, pulling me toward the pit. I screamed, thrashing, but the hum drowned it out, and my voice wasn't mine, it was theirs, a high, keening wail. The last thing I saw was my reflection in the pit's edge. Hollow eyes, too wide grin. Not me, not anymore. I don't know how long I fell. Time doesn't exist down there, just dark, cold, and fear, endless and alive. I relive it every second, the trail, the jeep, the cave, watching myself run, scream, break over and over while they feed. I'm theirs now, claimed. Years later, a hiker found my camera near the Penn Lake, half buried in mud. The footage was corrupted, static and screams, but the last frame survived. My face, hollow-eyed, grinning, staring into the lens. The hum plays on loop, faint but there, calling whoever's next. And that's where Ethan's story ends, or begins, depending on how you see it. The hollows of UA Reservoir don't just take you, they keep you, whispering through the dark long after the last frame fades. But the wilderness has more shadows to share, more secrets that don't stay buried. Next, we're dropping into Stanislaus National Forest, a gorge so deep it swallows sound, where a double-date camping trip turned into a night of footsteps that didn't belong. What's waiting down there? Something that knows you're watching, and it's patient. If Ethan's tale chilled you, hit that like button and drop a comment. Tell me what you'd do if the hollows called your name. And if you're not subscribed to NoSleep Nightmares Reddit yet, smash that button now. Don't miss what's coming. Let's step into the gorge together. My name's Riley. I've camped more nights under the stars than I've slept in a bed. The wilderness, it's my church, my sanctuary. I've heard coyotes howl, felt the ground shake under a bear's weight, and laughed off storms that'd send most folks running. But what happened in Stanislaus last summer, it didn't just scare me, it carved itself into me. This is the story of a double-date camping trip that started with beer and firewood and ended with something I can't explain, something that's still out there waiting. It was supposed to be a good time, a double-date camping trip, me and my girlfriend Jess, plus our friends Nate and Callie. We'd been planning it for weeks, flipping through sites on Free Camp's net, until we found a gem, a spot at the bottom of a massive gorge in Stanislaus National Forest, not far from Yosemite. The reviews called it a hidden paradise, quiet, remote, perfect for a weekend of drinking and stargazing. The drive-in was brutal. Steep switchbacks winding down for nearly an hour, the van rattling over dirt and rock, cliffs looming like they might crush us if we misstepped. But when we hit the bottom, it felt worth it. 2 campgrounds sat along the river. The first was packed, RVs, kids screaming, the works. The second was empty. Not a soul, not a tent. That should have been our first clue. But we shrugged it off. More space for us, right? We picked a site between the dirt road and the river, separated from the water by a wall of dense sagebrush. The sun was still high, warming the pine-scented air, and we got to work, pitching tents, gathering wood, cracking open beers. It was picture perfect. Then we started noticing things. Near the fire pit, an old-fashioned rat trap, metal, brutal, the kind that'd snap a finger clean off, was tied to the grill with a frayed rope. Weird, but we figured some camper left it to keep critters out of their food. Down by the river, we found clothes laid out on a log. Underwear, socks, pants, a flannel shirt. All dry, neatly arranged, like someone had stepped out of them and vanished. No footprints, no sign of anyone. Maybe a hiker went swimming, Nate said, kicking at the dirt. Callie frowned, but we let it go. The river was cold, too cold for a dip, but people do dumb stuff out here. The sun dipped below the gorge's rim, shadows stretching long and jagged across the site. We built a fire, the crackle of flames mixing with our laughter as the beers flowed. By 9 p.m, we were settled in, me chopping wood with my axe, Jess sprawled on a blanket, Nate and Callie roasting marshmallows. The night was crisp, stars punching through the black above. It felt right until it didn't. I was mid-swing with the axe when I heard it. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crunching through the sagebrush behind me. The river was at my back, the fire in front, and those steps, they were coming closer. I froze, axe still in hand. "Guys, hear that?" I said, voice low. Nate looked up, marshmallow dangling from his stick, and cocked his head. Before anyone could answer, the footsteps broke into a sprint. Boots pounding the ground, crashing through the brush, charging straight for us. We jumped up, adrenaline spiking. I gripped the axe tighter, yelling into the dark, "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. Dead, instant silence. No rustle, no echo, just the fire popping and our ragged breathing. Jess grabbed a flashlight, sweeping it over the sagebrush, but nothing moved. No eyes glinted back, no shape broke the beam. We stood there, hearts hammering, waiting. 10 minutes crawled by, every second stretching taut. Then a stick snapped, close, deliberate, like someone shifting their weight just out of sight. That was it. We didn't pack. We threw everything into the van, no folding, no care, just go. I kept the axe in my lap as Nate floored it up the switchbacks, tires spinning on gravel. We didn't talk until we hit pavement, the gorge shrinking in the rear view. "That wasn't an animal," I said, voice shaking. "That was a person." No one argued. We should have left it alone. Should have chalked it up to some drunk hiker or a bad trip and moved on. But I couldn't. That sound, those footsteps, kept replaying in my head, a loop I couldn't shut off. I've camped my whole life, heard every noise the wild can throw at you. Coyote stalking, deer bolting, wind ripping through trees. This wasn't that. It was intentional, predatory. And those clothes on the log, that trap, they stuck with me. 2 weeks later, I went back, alone. Jess begged me not to go. Nate and Callie thought I was nuts. But I had to know. I loaded my pack, flashlight, knife, a recorder, extra batteries, and drove back to Stanislaus. The switchbacks felt tighter this time, the cliffs darker, like they were leaning in. I parked at the empty campground, the silence thicker than before. No wind, no birds, just my pulse thudding in my ears. The fire pit was still there, ashes cold, the rat trap dangling from its rope like a warning. I started toward the river, flashlight cutting through the dusk. The clothes were gone, but the log was wet, too wet, like something had just climbed out of the water. I knelt, running my fingers over the wood, and froze. Scratches, deep, jagged like claws had raked it. Not animal claws, too precise, too spaced. My stomach twisted. I clicked on the recorder, whispering, "Day 1, back at the site, something's off." The sagebrush loomed ahead, a tangled wall between me and the river. I pushed through, thorns snagging my jacket, and that's when I heard it again. Footsteps, slow at first, crunching on the far side. I swung the light, beam trembling, but the brush was too thick. "Hello," I called, voice cracking. The steps stopped. Silence. Then a whisper. Not words, just a hiss, low and guttural, slithering through the air. My skin prickled. I backed up, tripping over roots, and the whisper grew. Multiple voices now, overlapping, circling me. I ran, crashing through the brush, flashlight bouncing. The whispers chased me, weaving through the trees, my name slipping into the noise. Riley, Riley, Riley. I hit the campsite, panting, and spun around. Nothing, just shadows. But the recorder, when I played it back later, caught it. Voices, clear as day, saying, "Stay, watch." I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, axe in hand, listening to the gorge breathe. The next day I went deeper. The gorge has a pull. You feel it in your bones, a tug that says, keep going, even when every nerve screams run. I followed the river downstream, past our old site, into a stretch where the cliffs tighten and the trees thin. The air grew heavy, damp, like the earth was sweating. I found a trail, not on any map, narrow and worn, winding into a ravine. The recorder hummed in my pocket, picking up static I didn't hear in the moment. The ravine was a chokehold. Walls of rock on either side, the river a black ribbon below. Footprints dotted the dirt, not boots, not bare feet, but something else. Long, thin, with too many toes. I traced one with my finger, the edges crumbling, and a chill sank into me. The whispers started again, faint, drifting from the cliffs above. I looked up, nothing but shadows shifting against the stone. But I felt them, eyes, dozens of them, pressing down. I kept going, the trail dipping into a hollow where the river widened. That's where I found the camp, or what was left of it. A shredded tent, poles snapped like twigs, fabric stained dark, a cooler, lid torn off, food scattered and rotting. And bones, small, picked clean, scattered in a circle around a fire pit that still smoldered. Not animal bones, too small, too human. My breath caught, recorder trembling in my hand as I whispered. Found something. Old camp. Something bad happened here. The whispers turned to laughter, sharp, jagged, echoing off the rocks. I swung the flashlight, beam catching movement, shapes darting between the trees, too fast, too tall. Not people, not animals, something else. I bolted, retracing the trail, the laughter chasing me, clawing at my mind. Back at my tent, I played the recording. Under my voice, a new one. He sees. He stays. My blood ran cold. I couldn't stop. Should have packed up, driven out, forgotten it. But those bones, that laughter, they hooked me. Back home, I locked myself in, curtains shut, laptop my only light. The whispers followed me, faint. But there, in the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floor, I had to know what was in that gorge. So I dug, and what I found turned my fear into something worse. The recorder was my first clue. Hours of static, then voices, not mine, layered under the wind. Come back, see us. I scoured the internet, starting with Stanislaus, trail reports, missing persons, anything. A forum post from 2011 caught my eye. Gorge Ghosts, by a user named River Wraith. He'd camped near our site, heard footsteps, whispers, found a trap like ours tied to a tree. They watch you, he wrote. Don't go back. Comments mentioned hikers vanishing, 5 in the last decade, all near that gorge, no bodies found. Newspapers from the 80s had more. A ranger went missing in 87, last seen near the river. His pack turned up a month later, contents untouched, surrounded by those same too many-toed prints. Another article, older, 1920s, talked of loggers abandoning the area after shadows with voices drove them out. One quote stuck. They don't kill you fast. They wait. I tracked down an old-timer, Hank, who'd fished Stanislaus for decades. Met him at a bar, his hands gnarled, eyes darting. "You heard him, didn't you?" he rasped when I mentioned the whispers. "The Watchers. Been there since the river cut the gorge. Not human, not anymore. They take what wanders too close." He leaned in, breath sour. "You're marked now. They don't let go." Marked. The word hit hard. That night, I woke to scratches on my arm, shallow but real, like something had clawed me in my sleep. The recorder, left running, caught whispers. "Riley, stay." I stopped sleeping, living on coffee and fear, digging deeper. A library archive had a journal, 1890, a trapper named Elias Crow. He wrote of things in the gorge that mimicked voices, luring his dogs away. "They wear the dark," he scrawled. "Eyes like holes. Bones twist when they're done." The last page was a drawing. Tall, thin figures, eyeless, hands too long, standing over a pile of warped skeletons. A folklorist I called tied it to a Paiute tale. Spirits bound to the gorge, cursed to feed on the living, growing stronger with each soul. "They don't just kill," she said. "They claim." I hung up, hands shaking, and saw it in the mirror. Scratches spreading, eyes sinking. I was theirs. I couldn't run. The scratches reached my chest, itching, burning, like they were carving me up from the inside. The whispers were constant. My name, over and over, in the walls, the air. I had one chance. Go back, find their source, stop it. I drove to Stanislaus at dawn, armed with a flashlight, knife, salt, a shotgun. Anything to fight what I couldn't understand. The gorge was wrong. Trees bent inward, roots pulsing like veins. The river black and still. The air reeked of rot, thick and choking. I followed the trail to the hollow, shotgun heavy in my hands. The camp was worse. Bones piled higher, the tent shredded to ribbons, the fire pit glowing despite no fuel. Footprints circled it. Too many, leading to a crack in the cliff. A cave, dark and gaping. The whispers roared as I stepped inside, a wall of sound that rattled my skull. The walls glistened, wet with something black, carved with eyeless faces and twisted limbs. Bones littered the floor, human, animal, fused into shapes that defied reason. At the center, a pool, inky and deep, rippling with the hum. The Watchers emerged, hundreds, their forms flickering, eyeless holes glowing, mouths stretched wide. They didn't rush, just drifted, closing in. I fired the shotgun, buckshot vanishing into them like smoke. The scratches erupted, blood mixing with that black ooze, pulling me to the pool. I screamed, slashing with the knife, but they grabbed me, cold, wet hands, too many. My voice became theirs, a wail echoing in the dark. I saw my reflection, eyeless, grinning, before the pool swallowed me. I'm there now, endless dark, reliving it. Their whispers my only company. A ranger found my gear months later, the recorder still running. "Riley, stay," on loop. "The gorge waits. Don't go." Riley's nightmare didn't end when he left that gorge. It followed him, carved into his skin, echoing in the silence he can't escape. The Watchers of Stanislaus don't forgive, and they don't forget. But the wild's got one more twist for us tonight, one more scream to rattle your bones. We're heading up to the Sierra Nevada now, where a teenage hike turned into a brush with something that wasn't human. Or was it? A man, a monster, a mimic. It's waiting in the pines, and its voice will haunt you long after the trail ends. If the gorge got under your skin, let me know in the comments. What would you have done with those footsteps closing in? Give this a like, And if you haven't subscribed to NoSleep Nightmares Reddit, do it now. Trust me, you won't sleep after this next one. Ready? Let's climb into the scream. My name's Sam. I grew up in the Sierra Nevada. Pines in my blood, trails in my bones. I've hiked those mountains since I could walk, laughed at bears, dodged rattlesnakes, and called it home. But 10 years ago, when I was 16, something happened up there that didn't just scare me. It changed me. This is the story of a hike with my cousin and her boyfriend. A day that started with sandwiches and ended with a scream I can't forget. Something's still out there, and it knows my name. It was the summer I turned 16, a golden July in the Sierra Nevada. My cousin Celia had just finished her freshman year of college and brought her boyfriend Jay home to meet the family. Jay was a city kid, all slick hair and shiny hiking boots, itching to see the real wilderness. Celia and I picked a favorite trail, a moderate climb through the woods, gentle incline, peaking at a hollow with a killer view of Lake Tahoe. It wasn't on the tourist maps, mislabeled online, a local secret with epic payoffs. Perfect for Jay's first taste of the Sierras, we set out that Saturday morning, the three of us, me, Celia, Jay. Backpacks stuffed with water, sandwiches, and a cheap camera. The trail wound through towering pines, sunlight dappling the dirt, the air crisp with sap and earth. We passed a few hikers, granola types with dogs and camelbacks, but they thinned out fast. By noon, we hit the hollow, a natural balcony overlooking the lake's shimmering blue. Jay was hooked, snapping selfies and oohing at the view while we ate. Celia and I swapped stories, laughing about the time we tried luring a mountain lion with steak as kids. Dumb, but we were fearless back then. We lounged for an hour, soaking it in, until a scream ripped through the quiet. Not human, mountain lion, sharp and blood-curdling, like a woman dying in terror. It came from down the mountain, close enough to raise the hairs on my neck. Jay froze, sandwich halfway to his mouth. "What the hell was that?" he stammered. Celia and I exchanged looks. We'd heard lions before, mating calls, fights, but this felt off. Too near, too raw. "Means there's more than one," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We should head back." We packed fast, Jay still rattled, but Celia and I weren't fazed, yet. Bears were softies here. Wildfires were the real threat. A lion. We'd be fine in a group. 40 minutes down the trail, Jay stopped. "My phone," he groaned. "Left it at the lookout." It had all his spring break pics, and he was broke, couldn't replace it. After a quick debate, Celia and Jay turned back to grab it. I stayed, perched on a shady rock just off the trail, ready to warn any hikers about the lions. Safety in numbers, right? I pulled out my phone, no service, just Temple Run, and waited. They'd been gone 50 minutes when the scream came again. Closer this time, up the trail where they'd be coming from. My stomach tightened. I told myself lions don't scream when they hunt. They're silent killers. This was something else. Another 20 minutes, another scream, louder, nearer. I stood, flashlight on despite the daylight, scanning the trees. Every rustle, every flicker of shadow had me jumping. Then I saw him. He was 20 feet up the trail, just off the path, tall, skinny, naked, filthy with dirt and grime. He stood still, staring at me. No sound, no movement. I'd seen lost hikers before. Panic turns people weird. But this guy, he didn't look lost. He looked wrong. My first thought was hypothermia, stripping clothes off. But it was July, 90 degrees. I stepped closer, 15 feet now, and called, "You okay?" No answer. Just those eyes, dark and empty, locked on me. A wave of dread hit. pure primal wrongness. The hair on my neck stood up, my gut screaming run. I asked again, "You all right?" He opened his mouth wide and screamed. Not human, not animal, but that same mountain lion shriek, high and keening, vibrating my bones. I screamed back, stumbling, ready to bolt. He stopped, turned, and ran into the trees, vanishing fast. The feeling stayed, sick, heavy, like I'd brushed death. Celia and Jay found me 10 minutes later, pale when I told them. We called the rangers when we got service, but I couldn't shake it. Was he a lost hiker? Something worse? I had to know. That scream haunted me. I told myself it was a crazy guy, some meth head lost in the woods, mimicking the lions. But those eyes, empty, endless, they stuck with me. Celia swore it was a skinwalker, some malevolent thing from the stories our grandma told. Jay laughed it off, but he didn't see it. I did. 2 weeks later, I went back alone, against everyone's pleas, to find answers. I hiked up at dawn, the trail familiar but heavier now, the pines looming like they were watching. My pack held a flashlight, knife, recorder, and a cheap trail cam. Proof, if I needed it. The air was thick, the usual bird chatter gone. I hit the hollow by noon, the lake sparkling below, but it felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. I set the cam facing the spot where he'd stood, clicked on the recorder and whispered. August 3rd, back at the hollow. Looking for him. I waited, perched on that rock, ears straining. An hour in, a rustle, soft, deliberate, came from the trees. I swung the flashlight, beam slicing the shadows, and caught a flicker, something darting behind a pine. Too tall for a deer, too thin for a bear. "Who's there?" I called. Silence. Then a scream. Not the lions, but lower, guttural, rolling up from the ground. My skin crawled. I gripped the knife, backing toward the trail. The scream came again, closer, joined by whispers, faint, overlapping. My name slipping through. Sam, Sam, Sam. I ran, flashlight bouncing, the whispers chasing me down the slope. Back at my car, I played the recorder. Under my voice, a new one. He's here, he sees. My hands shook. I didn't sleep that night, the scream looping in my head. I couldn't let it rest. The next day, I went deeper, past the hollow, down a side trail I'd never taken, narrow and overgrown. The pines thinned, the ground dropping into a ravine where the air turned cold, damp, like something breathing. The recorder hummed, static crackling, as I pushed on. The ravine was tight, cliffs hemming me in, a dry creek bed snaking below. Footprints marked the dirt, not shoes, not paws, but long, bony, with claw-like toes. I traced one, the edges crumbling, and a chill sank in. Whispers drifted from above, soft, insistent. I looked up. Shadows shifted along the ridge, too many, too still. Eyes, I felt them, boring down. The trail dipped into a clearing, a campsite, or what was left. A tent, shredded, poles bent like straws, fabric stained black. A backpack, gutted, clothes strewn like entrails, and bones, small, human, scattered around a cold fire pit, gnawed clean. My breath hitched, recorder trembling as I whispered, "Found a camp." Something tore it apart. The whispers turned to laughter, sharp, echoing off the rocks. I swung the flashlight, catching shapes, tall, thin, flickering between the trees. Not human, not anything I knew. They moved fast, silent, eyeless faces glinting in the beam. I bolted, laughter clawing at my ears, back to my tent. The recording later had a voice. "He stays. He's ours." I knew then. I wasn't alone anymore. I should have stopped. Should have burned the recorder, moved away, forgotten it. But those bones, that laughter. They owned me. Back home, I locked myself in, blinds shut, laptop my lifeline. The whispers followed, faint, in the walls, the hum of the AC. I had to know what was up there. So I dug, and the truth started peeling me apart. The recorder was first. Hours of static, then voices. Sam, come back, see us. I hit the internet. Sierra Nevada disappearances, trail law. A blog from 2009, Tahoe Shadows, described a hiker hearing screams, finding claw marks near our trail. They watch, he wrote. Don't go alone. Comments listed vanishings, 7 in 20 years, all near that hollow, no trace. Newspapers from the 90s had a ranger missing, his boots found upright, surrounded by those prints. I found an old guide, Maria, who patrolled the Sierras for decades. Met her at a diner, her eyes sharp, hands steady. You saw it, she said when I mentioned the scream. The hollow ones. Been there since the mountains rose. Not alive, not dead, something else. They take you slow. She gripped my arm. You're marked now. They don't forget. Marked. That night, I woke to scratches. On my chest, shallow, bleeding, like claws in my sleep. The recorder caught. Sam, stay. I stopped sleeping, chasing answers. A 19th century trapper's journal described pine wraiths, mimicking voices, stealing his men. They wear no eyes, he wrote, but see all. A sketch showed them, tall, eyeless, claws over twisted bones. A historian tied it to a Paiute curse. Spirits bound to the peaks, feeding on souls. They claim you, he whispered, eyeing my scratches. In the mirror, I saw it, eyes hollowing, skin graying. I was theirs. I couldn't escape. The scratches spread, burning, carving me up. The whispers were everywhere. My name, endless, in the air, my skull. One chance. Go back. Find their heart. End it. I drove up at dusk, armed with a flashlight, knife, salt, a rifle. Anything to fight the unkillable. The trail was warped. Pines bent inward, roots pulsing, the air thick with rot. I hit the clearing, the camp worse, bones piled high, the tent dust, the fire pit glowing with no flame. Footprints led to a cave in the cliff, black and gaping. The whispers roared as I entered, a wall of sound shaking my bones. Walls glistened, carved with eyeless faces, bones fused in heaps. A pit pulsed at the center, dark and alive. The hollow ones surged, hundreds eyeless, grinning, flickering forms. I fired the rifle, bullets vanishing, useless. The scratches erupted, blood and black ooze pulling me to the pit. They grabbed me, cold, wet claws, too many. My scream became theirs, a wail in the dark. My reflection, eyeless, grinning, faded as the pit took me. I'm there, endless dark, reliving it, their whispers my cage. A hiker found my recorder, Sam, stay looping. The Sierras wait, don't answer the scream. And there it is, nightmare seekers. The wild's dark heart laid bare. From the hollows that claimed Ethan in UA Reservoir, to the watchers stalking Riley in that whispering gorge, to the scream that still echoes for Sam in the Sierra Nevada pines. These aren't just stories, they're warnings, etched in shadows and screams, reminding us the wilderness doesn't sleep. And neither should you. What's out there, waiting in the places we think we know? Stick around, because the next nightmare might be closer than you think. Maybe right outside your door. If these tales kept you up, smash that like button and drop a comment. Which one's gonna haunt you tonight? Subscribe to NoSleep Nightmares Reddit if you haven't. Help me hit 1,000 subs so I can unearth more horrors for you. Sleep tight, if you dare. See you in the dark.